Hi, my name is AJ Deitz, and I will be discussing the project that I have been working on throughout the course, Topics in Industrial Arts. I will begin by giving some background information on the project itself. I will then go on to share a document that I've created and highlight some of the work I've done. I will then discuss some of the challenges that arose during the creation of this project and how I was able to overcome them. At the beginning of this project, I identified the challenge of what can I integrate into my teaching to help my students develop their own set of morals. As I began working, I shifted slightly to the new challenge of what can I integrate into my teaching to help my students develop positive global citizenship. As I began working, I identified 7 big picture goals of what I was hoping to accomplish by the end of this project. What I wanted to do was create working documents that, as a teacher, I would be able to use to deliver a unit on energy sources and their impacts. The 7 big picture goals that I wanted to have by the end of this project was I wanted to have the documents required to deliver a lesson on energy sources and their potential, deliver a lesson on the negative impacts of non-renewable energy sources, to run an activity highlighting the impacts of energy sources, to teach a lesson on sustainable energy sources, to run an activity highlighting the benefits of sustainable energy sources, to teach a lesson on the potential for sustainable energy in Manitoba, and to run a final project on sustainable energy sources. We'll now share one document that I have created for my project that I believe brings in particular value, and that is this bank of discussion questions. When generating these questions, what I tried to keep in mind is that I didn't want to elicit either yes or no answers from students, but I wanted to get them engaged in deeper level thinking and to open them up to new perspectives. The first question in this bank is, considering the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, as well as the cleanness of nuclear electricity production, do you think we should shift towards the use of nuclear power? Why or why not? The idea here is not to have one student be correct and another be incorrect, but rather for students to share their position, give reasoning as to why they believe that, and to help them expand their current knowledge and perspectives. Another question that I've asked in the bank here is, why might a sustainable and renewable energy source such as hydropower still have negative impacts? The goal with a question like this is to have students go beyond just the environmental impacts of an energy source, but to begin to think about both the economic as well as the cultural impacts that an energy source may have. Might there be some displacement of people? Could wildlife be negatively affected? These are all things that are often overlooked when we talk about a renewable or sustainable energy source, as all we really are concerned with are their immediate environmental impacts. The idea with all of these questions is that students will be able to learn new perspectives and build on the knowledge they're gaining from the course by listening to other people rather than just the instructor. These discussion questions have been implemented throughout my lessons and activities. A second document that I wish to highlight is the lesson that I have created for Introduction to Energy Sources. This lesson is a PowerPoint document that starts with the students viewing a YouTube video to pique their interest and give them some background knowledge on energy sources and electricity production. One item that I am particularly proud of about this lesson are the jigsaw readings that I have included at the end. There are 4 different jigsaw readings that students within groups will be completing. Each of these 4 readings share different positions and different opinions on the issue of electricity production and their impacts. Now, none of these readings I would consider to have the correct or right answer, but they all share different perspectives and they all justify their analysis of the pros and cons. What I'm proud of is that I will get students to each read a different document in this jigsaw activity, share their information together, which will help broaden their understandings of the issue at large. It was deliberate and intentional to find readings with varying positions and varying perspectives to show students that there is not just one correct answer, but rather to allow them to open up their minds to listening to new perspectives and to gain new information from different resources. When working on this project, there was one challenge that arose multiple times for me. This challenge was that I was lacking meaningful ways to illustrate to my students the impacts felt by energy sources used in Canada. After consulting with a member of my professional learning network, I came up with two different ideas of how I could do this more meaningfully. Each of these ideas were developed into their own activity. The first activity is that students were to reach out to a member of an Indigenous community affected by the Kiosk project in the lower Nelson River. Students were to generate interview-style questions and conduct an interview to this community member to get a better understanding of the impacts felt by them and to learn new perspectives. The second way that I was able to meaningfully illustrate the impacts felt by energy sources used in Canada was to organize and coordinate a guided tour of the Manitoba Electrical Museum and Educational Centre on Harrow Street. Throughout the tour, students will be given a history of Manitoba's electricity through 6 themes from the 1870s to the present. There is also an exhibit currently going on in the museum that features sustainable development, caring for our common future. Through a guided tour of this facility, students will look at a history of electricity production in Manitoba, specifically hydroelectricity. As students gain more knowledge on the history of how electricity has been generated in Manitoba, it will allow them to understand new perspectives on the impacts of these energies. Most of Manitoba's electricity production comes from hydroelectric power. Although hydroelectric power is a relatively clean energy source because it emits very few CO2 emissions, it still has many impacts that can be felt. These impacts can both be on people as well as wildlife. For me, it is important that students understand the history of this electricity production in Manitoba to help further their understanding of the impacts felt. I believe that by interviewing an Indigenous member of a community impacted by the Kiosk project in northern Manitoba, as well as taking a guided tour of the Manitoba Electrical Museum and Educational Centre, students will be given more meaningful ways to understand and realize some of the impacts felt by hydroelectric production in Manitoba. Upon completion of this project, I believe that I was able to obtain my big picture goals and solve the challenge that I had set out in the beginning. That challenge is, what can I integrate into my teaching to help my students develop positive global citizenship? The way I did this was through creating all of the documents required for me to teach a unit on energy sources and their impacts. Throughout working on this project, I was able to develop new and more meaningful ways for me to reach my students and to be able to leave a lasting impact on them. The idea of my unit was not to give my students yes or no answers or just to deliver content. The main goal was that students were able to develop new perspectives as well as a broader understanding of everyone and everything affected by energy sources. By completing this project, I have learned that what I want from my students is for them to be able to analyze the pros and cons of different contemporary issues. I want them to be able to debate with one another based on different positions they may take, and I want them to be open to learning new perspectives. After taking this unit, I hope that my future students are able to better understand the impacts of the choices that they make and keep these impacts in mind when making choices in the future. Everyone consumes energy and electricity, but it's important that we understand the broad impacts and everyone that is being affected by it. I hope that my students are able to develop skills in gaining new knowledge and perspectives while keeping an open mind. I hope that both my students and myself continue to grow and continue to keep our minds open to what other people's experiences might be. Thank you for watching my video and have a great rest of your day.